I don't like watching bad movies. I don't like writing about bad movies. Renegade Cut rarely tackles films I dislike because hating something almost never lights a fire under me to get to work. Now, I was raised by Mystery Science Theater 3000 like so many others, but I don't identify with the culture of bad, the amusement of bad media. It's not that I can't have a good laugh at something that fails spectacularly, but every time I'm watching a genuinely bad movie, I think I would rather be watching something great, something that will move me. But I'm starting to think differently about this. I feel that if I ignore the truly awful, I might lose a perfect opportunity to point out what doesn't work and why. And so, last weekend, I sat down and watched all 4 live-action Transformers films. I always heard they were bad. Tales of racism, for example. About 2 minutes into the film, an army soldier tells his Spanish-speaking comrade to stop talking in his first language. "Speak English," he says. And only a few minutes later, another character tells another Hispanic person, "Don't go Ricky Ricardo on me." This is the second time within the first 15 minutes of the first film that someone has been admonished for speaking Spanish. That sets the tone for the entire film series. Minorities behave like clowns, and in one case, he's an actual clown. Couple that with atrocious portrayal of women and uncomfortable fetishization of the military and glorification of war, and you've got yourself a socially backwards series of films. But that's not actually what I want to talk about. You've probably heard all that before. My intention here is not to blast the Transformers films for not conforming to my social politics. Transformers, as a film series, is structurally unsound and inept in its cinematography and its editing. It fails as an example of the action genre, and it fails simply as film, the visual medium and art form. In order to understand the visual style of the Transformers films, we must first understand the visual style of director Michael Bay. If you watch his action films, you'll notice a lot of commonalities. The 2 most notable traits in the visual style of Michael Bay films are layers of movement in the objects and characters on screen, and the movement of the camera. Audiences are quick to note that Michael Bay frequently overuses his epic 360 camera spin in nearly all of his movies. The subject of the shot rises, the camera spins, the background appears to spin too because it's in frame, but the subject is actually mostly standing still. What people don't always realize is that even though this is Michael Bay's signature move, he's actually pulling off a variation of this shot in almost every scene in the Transformers films, because the camera is always moving. It creates depth, yes, but it also does not allow for any quiet moments. And believe it or not, action movies need those. More on that later. What you're seeing right now is a series of shots from all 4 Transformers films. No matter if you're watching a car chase, an epic battle, 2 people casually talking, an emotional moment, or whatever, the camera is always moving. It never lets up. It's either shaking or sliding or swirling around. Now you might be watching this nauseous series of scenes and thinking maybe I'm just cherry picking to prove my point. But no, it's really like this, and if you don't believe me, you can go back and watch all 4 Transformers films yourself like I did. There are very few scenes in each of the 4 films in which the camera is stationary for more than a few seconds. There are scenes in these films with the camera sliding around like it has ice skates on, and only for scenes of people sitting in chairs. I'm not joking, that is not hyperbole. This is actually what these movies are like. And if you ever wondered why you couldn't get into the action of these movies, this is a big reason why. You may not have consciously noticed why the Transformers film series is so unpleasant to watch, but your brain told you right away. Nothing ever stays still. There can be no quiet moments of reflection, not even right after Optimus Prime dies during Revenge of the Fallen. Decepticons discussing tactics, camera swirls around. Someone in a used car lot, camera swirls around. Literally anything, camera swirls around. No control, no grace, no sense of art. Look, not every shot can be an action-packed, dynamic set piece, but Michael Bay doesn't seem to realize that. Now you may be thinking, hey, these are action movies, not Bergman films. Of course the camera is going to twist around. Okay, granted, these are action movies, and action movies involve a lot of fluid movement. That's absolutely true. But bear something in mind. There's a difference between an action movie and an action scene. And everything in the Transformers movies is shot like an action scene, even when it's not an action scene. This is a dialogue scene between two characters. There is no action, there's no battle, nothing like that. It's just two people talking, but it's shot like an action scene. Everything in this movie looks and sounds like a car alarm going off at 3 a.m. It might help to compare Transformers to a more competently made action movie. This is Die Hard. I mean, obviously, this is Die Hard. You know it's Die Hard, even if you've never seen Die Hard. It's usually on every top 10 list for greatest action movies of all time. This is John McClane fighting Tony. There are a lot of cuts and shots to new angles and kinetic motion because this is supposed to be a tense scene. Fight scenes are like this. But you know what? With the exception of the explosion towards the end, the most memorable parts of Die Hard are all static shots, like this one.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
And this scene.
Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
Oh, and this scene. People remember this scene. McClane and Sergeant Powell are opening up to each other. Powell is describing the night that he mistakenly killed a child. The camera is tight on Powell, and when we look back on McClane, the camera stays still here too, but the scene doesn't suffer for it. It's not boring. The close-up on Powell allows us to see his emotion, his turmoil. The use of visuals is perfect in this scene because Die Hard, often called the greatest action movie of all time, has a lot of down moments. It's paced well, it's shot competently, and whether we realized it or not when we watched, the most memorable scenes in the film were not of people exploding. Watch the movie again, most of it is suspense, very few actual fights. The most memorable visual of someone dying in the entire movie is this scene. In slow motion, using one camera angle, then switching to another outside the building, because the tension and the story carry this action film. Not sensory overload like in Transformers. I want something to be very clear here, and this is important. In order to create these dynamic shots, Michael Bay must have incredible attention to detail, and must put a lot of hard work and a lot of hours to give each shot so many layers. I don't question Bay's commitment, and I think it's too easy to demonize him for his failings. He obviously cares about how his films look. There's nothing lazy about his work, but that doesn't change the fact that he doesn't seem to have any grasp on how much sensory overload he is putting into each scene, and how much this actually detracts from his own movies. There's no controlled action. Michael Bay, unfortunately, doesn't appear to have any sense of restraint, and these 4 films suffer for it. If you watch all 4 movies in succession like I did, you'll notice that the last 45 minutes to an hour is one prolonged action sequence that never lets up. Now that almost sounds impressive if the action were any good, but as I just said, it's this unpleasant, painful swirl of nonsense. If an action scene goes on too long, we forget what standing still feels like, and the action loses its bite. The same rule applies for being too loud. When people want to crack wise about Michael Bay, they usually bring up explosions. His movies have lots of explosions, buildings, cars, and robots kerploding all over the place. And there's nothing wrong with a nice big explosion in an action movie, it's kind of expected. See this explosion? Doesn't look so bad in a vacuum, but preceding this explosion was another explosion, and right after the first explosion I showed you is another explosion. There are dozens of explosions in his action movies, usually one after another, repeating, endlessly. There's actually another failing in terms of the visuals. Megatron and Starscream have the same color palette and look nearly identical. The same is true of Jazz, an Autobot. Does anyone know who's fighting here and why? Which one's the Decepticon? Too many of the robots look alike. It makes distinguishing one from the other in a fight scene needlessly challenging. How am I supposed to root for the Autobots if I can't instantly tell which one is which? Complicated fight scenes require some way to immediately distinguish one from the other, through color, through camera position, or some other method. This is a one-on-one fight scene from The Matrix. It requires very little in order to control the chaos. There are only 2 figures on screen. It's choreographed well, and every movement is clear. This is a larger scale fight scene from Oldboy. There are far more combatants, but the director keeps everything in focus by keeping the camera only gently moving, and always keeping the main character in the center of the frame in the early goings of the fight, and then on the right side of the screen towards the end of the fight, with the enemies on the left. Even though there are dozens of fighters, we always know who is the main subject of the fight scene through simple but effective camera technique. This is a fight scene from Kill Bill. It has our protagonist in bright yellow, but all of her adversaries are in black and white. There's so much fighting, so many swords, so many heads getting cut off, but due to proper use of color, there isn't a single frame of action that the audience misses. Admittedly, the scale of a giant robot fight is different from human beings fighting, but this scene from Pacific Rim makes everything clear. No overload. It can be done on this scale. When people are asked why they don't like the Transformers films, they sometimes reference how unfaithful they are to the cartoons, but these films have problems in and of themselves. When people are asked why the Transformers films are seen as genuinely terrible, they say the films are stupid, and they are, but a movie doesn't have to be brilliant to be competently shot and edited. Even if the racism, overblown product placement, and poor humor don't bother you, these films fail on a purely technical level. And that's a really important thing to understand about why a film, as a piece of art, as a piece of this medium, can reasonably be called bad. Thanks for watching.